You ever heard of someone buying a mountain just to shut off the water to 342 luxury homes? Yeah, me neither. Until I did it. Before we dive into the full chaos of HOA corruption, forged documents, and a pipeline war nobody saw coming, drop a comment below telling me what your HOA horror story is. Or, if you're lucky enough not to have one, just type, "No HOA, no problem." Let's compare battlefields. You either sell that land, or the neighborhood's going to get very uncomfortable for you. She said it with a smile, a perfect white smile, coated in Southern charm and corporate poison. That was the first thing Cynthia Lulton, president of the Clear Hollow Ridge HOA, said to me that wasn't wrapped in passive-aggressive pleasantries. But let's rewind, because this story doesn't start with threats. It starts with a funeral. I was never meant to be a rancher. My life was tech, code, logistics systems, digital schedules, and automated deliveries. I knew how to solve complex inventory puzzles across global supply chains, not how to replace a busted water pump on a 15-acre patch of stubborn Texas dirt. But death has a strange way of rewriting plans. When my dad passed heart attack, sudden, final, I left Silicon Valley and flew back to Texas for a funeral that didn't feel real until I stood at the edge of our land, facing the barn he'd built with his own hands. They say the land remembers who walks it. That land remembered my father. It showed it in the grooves of the fence line, in the rust on his tools, in the hand-scrawled maintenance log still hanging in the old shed. It remembered what he gave it, and it was waiting to see what I'd do next. At first, the answer was nothing. I didn't sell, but I didn't stay either, until my mother, Peggy, formidable as ever, even at 68, looked me dead in the eye over sweet tea and said, "Your father always believed this land would be here when you were ready. Question is, are you?" Turns out, I didn't quit tech. I took a sabbatical, time to reconnect, time to breathe, time to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with a ranch that smelled like cow dung and stubbornness. 2 weeks in, I was finally finding rhythm sunrise chores, scratched hands, sore back. I didn't realize I'd also stepped into the middle of a Cold War I never knew existed. It began with an envelope, thick, white, and pretentious with an embossed gold logo that screamed HOA. Inside, an invitation to a community welcome mixer at the Clear Hollow Ridge Community Center. Clear Hollow Ridge. The name alone made my father grind his molars. 5 years ago, the subdivision sprang up like a mold patch just beyond our south fence uniform beige houses, triple garages, manicured lawns, and a man-made lake for people who'd never seen real mud. Mom said, "You should go. Your father was too proud to deal with them. Maybe you can find a better way." I should have trusted Dad's instincts. The Clear Hollow Community Center was all glass walls and artificial charm. I walked in wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt. They were wearing cufflinks. I felt like I'd shown up to a poker game with Uno cards. That's when she approached. Blonde hair sprayed into perfection, white teeth, red nails, diamond ring catching the chandelier, light like a threat. "Mr. Morgan, you must be Eli. I'm Cynthia Lulton, president of the HOA. So pleased you could join us." She said it like she'd already planned how to write me out of the neighborhood newsletter. 7 minutes later, I was on a balcony with Cynthia and her shadow Richard Coleman, HOA vice president, retired lawyer, eyes like polished steel. "Eli," she said, with the false warmth of a woman about to slide a knife between your ribs, "we're truly sorry about your father. He was quite a character." The pause before character told me everything I needed to know. Then came the offer. Lowball, clean cut, delivered with a smile. "Clear Hollow would love to expand our recreation facilities. Your land is rustic quaint, even, but it's just not keeping with the aesthetic. And, of course, property values." The number she gave was 40% below the current market average. She might as well have offered to buy my boots for a handshake and a Starbucks coupon. "Not interested," I said, politely but firmly. Cynthia's smile tightened barely, but Richard's eyes narrowed. "Eli," she said, and this time her voice had the edge. "Being neighbors can be easy or difficult. The The threat sat between us like a loaded pistol on a poker table. I finished my water. Tell that to your lawyers, Cynthia. Then I left. Back home, Mom was waiting on the porch swing. They made you an offer, didn't they? I nodded. They did the same to your father, 15 times. Sent him violation notices too, even though they have no jurisdiction. She disappeared inside, came back with a bulging folder. Your father kept everyone. Said someday, someone would need them. She handed me the folder. I didn't say anything, but something inside me settled. That land remembered him. And now it would remember me. The first envelope came 3 days after the mixer. It was a notice, folded crisp and precise, printed on premium stock paper that tried very hard to look like authority. Notice of violation, non-compliant equipment storage. It accused me of leaving exposed machinery and unsightly materials within view of Clear Hollow Ridge. The equipment was a rusted tractor my father had used since I was 12. The unsightly material was a stack of firewood. I chuckled. My mother didn't. They're starting, she muttered, folding laundry with more force than necessary. This is exactly how they tried to wear down your father. Death by paperwork. I didn't respond. Not because I disagreed, because I wasn't yet sure just how far they were willing to take it. Turns out, they were willing to go much, much further. By the end of the month, I'd received 5 more letters. One about overgrown vegetation we have native prairie grass. Another citing odors consistent with animal waste we have animals. One even suggested unauthorized structural changes for a fence I was repairing with my own 2 hands. Each notice ended the same way: failure to comply may result in further action. The problem? They had no jurisdiction. My property wasn't in their HOA. Never had been. Never would be. But that didn't stop them from acting like it was. So I did what any man raised by a smart father and a tougher mother would do. I called a lawyer. Sarah Martinez didn't wear suits. She wore boots, denim, and the kind of direct tone that made courtroom opponents flinch before she even opened her folder. We met at a diner just off the county highway. I showed her the letters. She didn't even blink. This is textbook HOA intimidation, she said, pushing her glasses up. They're sending these to look official, knowing you'll either back off or screw up your defense. But they can't enforce anything, I said. Legally, no. But enforcement isn't the point. Harassment is. She sipped her coffee. What do you want to do with the land, Eli? I hesitated. I don't know yet, but I'm not going to sell it just so they can build a dog park. Sarah grinned. Then we start fighting back. Document everything. Every letter, every word. I'll draft a formal cease and desist. And you need to get your property resurveyed. I frowned. Why she looked at me like a teacher about to deliver the part of the lesson where kids learn the system is rigged. Because boundary lines have a funny way of shifting when HOAs think you're not paying attention. It took 3 weeks to get a county surveyor out. In that time, things calmed. The letters stopped. The HOA went quiet. Too quiet. On a Tuesday morning, Texas hot and bone dry, I was walking the southern fence line, replacing a busted post near the creek. That's when I saw it. Fresh dirt. A long, shallow scar in the ground that hadn't been there before. Still loose. Recently moved, like someone had dug, covered, and assumed no one would notice. I followed it. It curved, ran along the base of the slope, dipped under the fence, then ran straight toward Clear Hollow Ridge. There was piping visible in one spot. PVC, thick, fresh, partially buried but not settled yet. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. They'd built a pipeline, through my land, without permission, without notice, without shame. Sarah arrived within the hour, along with the surveyor. The man pulled out a GPS, checked his tablet, and frowned. It's on your property, by at least 27 feet. Sarah knelt near the exposed pipe, taking photos with meticulous care. They didn't even try to hide it properly, she muttered. This isn't just trespassing, it's illegal infrastructure installation. If it's active, I interrupted. What is it? Sarah stood. Best guess water. That creek feeds the aquifer. Clear Hollow pulls from. My bet. They've been tapping it for irrigation, or that fake lake they love so much. I stared at the pipe. and they thought they could just run a line across someone else's land. Sarah nodded. Because no one stopped them yet. That afternoon, I walked into the Clear Hollow Community Center again. This time, there were no hors d'oeuvres. I demanded a meeting with Cynthia. They made me wait, of course. Her office looked like an interior decorator had lost control of a Pinterest board. Too white, too clean, too fake. Eli, she said, without rising. Have you reconsidered our offer? I dropped the photographs on her desk. She blinked. Didn't touch them. What's this supposed to be? It's the pipeline your HOA installed through my land, I said calmly. No easement, no permission, no legal standing. I want it gone. Cynthia tilted her head, like she was trying to decide whether to lie or deflect. That's a serious accusation. So is trespassing. She leaned back. Our development has established water access rights. If there's some confusion over property lines, I'm sure we can clear it up amicably. There's no confusion, I said, sliding the signed survey across the desk. 27 feet. That's the number. That's your problem. Cynthia's smile vanished. You're making a mistake. Eli, you made yours first. As I left the building, a man caught up to me in the parking lot. Late 30s, nervous posture. Mr. Morgan, I'm Mike Hansen. I live in Clear Hollow. He glanced over his shoulder. I can't be seen talking to you, but you should know we've been paying extra HOA fees for the past year. Water system upgrades, $300 a quarter. He handed me a newsletter. They told us it was for community water independence. But nobody's seen a new well. Some of us have questions. Before I could reply, he was gone. I was never here. He called over his shoulder. Back at the ranch, Sarah studied the newsletter. They're not just trespassing, she said. They're charging residents for a fake upgrade and using stolen water to justify it. I stared at the paper. This is fraud, Sarah nodded. And if we play this right, it's the kind of fraud that could bury them. There's a difference between suspicion and proof. Suspicion keeps you up at night. Proof makes your enemies sweat in public. And that's exactly what we captured 3 nights later, thanks to a $140 trail camera disguised as a birdhouse and a hunch from Sarah that turned out to be dead on. It happened at 2:17 a.m. The footage was grainy, black and white, but there was no mistaking what we saw. Brad Thompson, Clear Hollow's facilities manager, standing on my land, wearing a reflective vest, holding a flashlight, and barking orders to 2 workers as they installed what looked like a larger pump head at the creek inlet. And then came the moment that changed everything. Brad raised his phone, turned slightly toward the camera without knowing it, and said, "Yes, Ms. Elton, we're upgrading it now. Should increase capacity by 30%, click, direct evidence, trespassing, unauthorized infrastructure, and verbal confirmation of Cynthia's involvement." I played the clip 3 times before saying anything. Mom didn't blink. Sarah, sitting across the table, leaned back and smiled. We just went from defense to offense. The next day, Sarah filed for a court injunction against Clear Hollow HOA and its officers, citing illegal installation of infrastructure, environmental interference, trespassing after formal notification, intentional misrepresentation of utility infrastructure. But while the court system ground forward like a reluctant tractor in mud, Cynthia moved fast. She pivoted, she spun, and she weaponized something no legal brief could beat in the short-term gossip. Within a week, strange rumors started trickling into my life like leaks in a rotten pipe. First it was Mrs. Finley at the grocery store. "Is it true you're putting in a Bitcoin mining operation? Dear?" Then the barber, who mentioned someone said I was selling the land to a company building a waste treatment facility. Every story had one thing in common. It cast me as a villain, a greedy outsider, a tech boy turned land abuser, a threat to community values. It didn't take long to guess the source. Then came the county inspector. His name was Thomas Green. No appointment, no warrant. Just showed up in a beige truck with a clipboard and a too-friendly grin. Says here we got some anonymous reports of unauthorized construction on this property. He said, I stared at him. What construction? He shrugged. You know, fences, trenching, maybe a shed. Hard to say. Just need to take a quick look around. Sarah, who happened to be there, stepped forward. Unless you have a court order or can show the specific statute authorizing a warrantless inspection of private agricultural land, you're not stepping 1 inch past this gate. He blinked, clearly not used to being challenged. She smiled sweetly. But you're welcome to leave a card. He left. Fast. That night, I found a certified letter in the mailbox. It was from the Clear Hollow HOA board, inviting me to appear at their next meeting to address multiple resident concerns regarding environmental risks originating from the Morgan property. I almost laughed. It was a trap, a stage, a show trial. Sarah looked at me. You should go. I raised an eyebrow. Seriously, absolutely, she said, but not to defend yourself, to pull the rug out. I arrived at the meeting wearing the same dusty boots I used to check fence posts. Sarah walked beside me in her courtroom denim. Jennifer, my sister, and the journalist, sat in the back with a small recording device clipped to her collar. The Clear Hollow clubhouse had been staged like a PR ambush. PowerPoint slides, chairs arranged in semicircle, a crowd of roughly 60 homeowners, many of whom looked tense but curious. Cynthia was already at the microphone. Perfect posture, smooth delivery. Political level performance. As you can see, she said, clicking through grainy, zoomed-in photos of my land. The Morgan property is in a state of decline. Overgrown brush, debris, fire hazards, environmental instability. She paused for effect. The creek's condition is of particular concern to our community, given its proximity to our development and its impact on aesthetics, safety, and property values. We believe it is Mr. Morgan's responsibility to... She stopped when I stood. All eyes turned. I walked slowly to the front, took the microphone, and didn't smile. Thank you for your concern, I began, but let me clarify what this meeting has conveniently failed to mention. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket, plugged it into the projector. On screen, Brad Thompson. At 2:17 a.m., installing a pump on my property, saying, yes, Ms. Elton, we're upgrading it now. Silence. I let it play twice. Then I faced the crowd. This is not about brush or aesthetics. This is about your HOA stealing water from my land, installing infrastructure without permission, and charging all of you $300 per quarter for what amounts to theft. A man in the second row turned to Cynthia. Is that true? She didn't answer. Another voice rose. What is this video? Who authorized that work? Chaos rippled. Someone called out. Where's the easement agreement? Show us the paperwork. Cynthia reached for the microphone, but someone else blocked her. I stepped back. Mission accomplished. Outside, Jennifer was grinning like a wolf. You just threw gasoline on her whole operation, she said. And the match, I added. But Sarah was more measured. They'll retaliate. Be ready. She wasn't wrong, because the next morning, my tractor engine wouldn't start. Turns out someone poured sugar in the fuel tank. That night, our mailbox was smashed, and spray paint appeared on our front gate. Sell your land. Hillbilly. It wasn't just about intimidation anymore. It was getting personal. I filed a report with the sheriff. Miller showed up in person. He looked tired, concerned, and careful. I'll file it, he said, but Eli, I've got limited manpower. Can't go accusing folks from Clear Hollow without hard proof. He didn't look me in the eye. Later that night, I got a call from Mike Hansen. Blocked number. Sheriff's Department gets donations from the Clear Hollow Community Fund. That's why Miller's soft on Cynthia. He paused. And you should know word is, Cynthia's planning something big, bigger than rumors. Watch your water. That night, I stood on the porch with Mom. She looked at the graffiti on the gate, the busted mailbox, the wrecked tractor. Your father built this place from scratch, she said quietly. And I'll be damned if a HOA queen with a clipboard and a god complex runs us off. I didn't say anything, but I didn't have to. Because the water war had just gone public, and I was ready to make someone choke on the truth. A war isn't won in a single confrontation, but you can damn sure tell when the other side decides to fight dirty. The sabotage started small, then escalated like they were following a playbook for intimidation. 101. First, it was the tractor, a 20-year-old John Deere, still humming like a champ until the morning I turned the ignition and heard a noise that should never come from any machine not designed for self-destruction. The mechanic confirmed it. Sugar in the fuel tank. A deliberate act of vandalism. Expensive, obvious, illegal. Then came the mailbox, beaten so badly it looked like it owed someone money. And finally, the spray paint, bright red, block letters, screamed across the front gate like a war banner. Sell your land. Hillbilly. That word hillbilly was the tell. Not because it hurt, but because it was a dog whistle, an attempt to isolate me, to make me feel like the outsider in my own damn land. Mom saw it and didn't blink. She walked up to the gate with a rag, dipped it in turpentine, and started scrubbing. Your father built this gate, she said, like she was talking to herself. No jumped-up real estate tyrant is going to tell me what's mine. She didn't finish the job. She left the word sell half erased, like a scar. On purpose. I want them to see it, she said. Let them know we know. I reported everything to Sheriff Miller. He arrived that afternoon, not with backup, not with intent, but with reluctance painted across every line in his face. I'll write it up, he said, flipping through his notepad with a sigh. But, Eli, you don't have any footage of who did it. No. And you didn't see anyone. No. He closed the pad. Then it's just vandalism. And unless someone confesses, there's not much we can do, unless it's your mailbox. I muttered. He gave me a sharp look, but didn't respond. Later that night, I got a call, blocked number, Mike Hansen again. She's tightening the screws, he said. The sheriff. He's on her list. The Clear Hollow Community Fund donates to his re-election campaign. I didn't answer, but Eli, listen, Cynthia's planning something legal. I overheard her on a call, something about documented easement rights tied to your dad. That word hit me like a cold slap. Easement. Yeah, she said. We have it on file. From before he died. My blood ran cold. Sarah was already waiting on the porch when I told her. Of course, she said, pacing. If they can't scare you off, they'll forge consent. We went straight to the county recorder's office the next morning. We dug through stacks of land documents until we found it. A water easement agreement dated 2 years ago, stamped, filed, signed by my father, except it wasn't his signature. It looked close. But to anyone who'd ever seen his chicken scratch on a check or a birthday card, it was off. Forgery, Sarah said, teeth clenched, and very well planned. Jennifer, who'd arrived from Austin that morning with her investigative gear and hard-nosed instincts, held up her phone. They created a legal backup plan. This isn't amateur hour. This is organized fraud. She snapped a photo of the document. Now we go hunting. For 3 days, Jennifer dug. She interviewed county clerks, scanned public financial records, reviewed old HOA newsletters. What she found wasn't just concerning, it was explosive. Turns out this wasn't Cynthia's first HOA presidency. She'd done this before, twice, both in upscale developments just outside Dallas and Houston. In both cases, the same pattern emerged. Landowners on adjacent non-HOA property pressured to sell, mysterious vandalism and code enforcement visits, anonymous complaints filed, environmental concerns raised, and finally, legal documents mysteriously appearing at just the right time. In both cases, the landowners sold under value, and in both cases, Cynthia profited indirectly through shell development entities. Sarah looked at Jennifer's wall of evidence and whistled. She's not just HOA royalty, she's a land shark in a blazer. But it was Jennifer's next discovery that changed everything. Eli, she said, one morning, do you remember that creek on the south end? Of course, that's where they tapped the water. She nodded. Well, I found something in the county water board's bulletin. It's going up for sale. What is the headwaters? The spring that feeds your creek? I stared at her. You're saying the source is being sold? Yep. State Water Board. Quiet notice. Bidding opens in 30 days. Whoever owns that parcel controls the source. Sarah sat up straight. If Clear Hollow gets their hands on it, they'll flip the narrative. They'll own the source, and you'll be the one stealing water downstream. Jennifer leaned in, eyes fierce. But if we buy it first, that night, we held a war council on the back porch. Mom, Jennifer, Sarah, and me. The air was thick with June heat and decision. Mom poured herself a tea, took a long sip, then nodded like a general approving an ambush plan. "Do it," she said. "Your father would have already done it by now." The next day, we formed a limited liability company, separate name, clean address registered to Sarah's office. We weren't going to tip our hand. Cynthia couldn't know, because if she found out, she'd outbid us. Or, worse, try to block the sale entirely. Sarah made the first call to Dave Wilson, a crusty, straight-shooting board member from the local water management agency. We met him for lunch at a diner with windows so old the sun looked tired coming through. "That woman," he muttered over barbecue, "has been trying to manipulate the system since they broke ground. Thinks a lake in a hedge maze entitles her to rewrite state water law." He couldn't help us directly, but he explained the bidding process, the map, the codes, and how to win legally without triggering a counteraction. We submitted our bid 5 days later, unassuming, quiet, no fanfare, no tip-off, just a $45,000 investment in a rocky, cess-wooded patch of land no developer wanted, except for the one with a pipeline sucking its veins dry. 3 weeks later, we received confirmation. We won. We now own the headwaters of the creek. We controlled the source. I waited until the paperwork was finalized, then I let the rumor slip, just enough. Within 48 hours, Cynthia was in full panic. She showed up at my gate, all pearls and rage. "You bought it," she hissed, voice sharp as acid. "That land belongs to Clear Hollow's water master plan." I didn't open the gate, just smiled. "It belongs to whoever signed the check. That's not you." Her face flushed. "You won't get away with this." "Already did," I said, then turned back toward the house. Behind me, Mom chuckled. She's not used to hearing no. The war had shifted. They'd forged papers. They'd sabotaged machines. They'd painted our fence with hate. Now we had the high ground, the literal source. The only question left was this: what happens when you cut off the tap? And that was something I intended to answer, personally. Some battles are fought with bullets, others with ballots. Mine came down to a deed, a buried valve, and one beautiful, legally binding piece of paper. The headwaters were mine. We'd won the bid quietly, buried the LLC paperwork even deeper than Cynthia had buried her illegal pipeline, and now sat on a spring that fed the entire Clear Hollow Ridge water system like a vein to a thirsty parasite. I could have thrown a party. Instead, I started planning a siege. We didn't tell anyone, not even most of our allies, for the first 48 hours. Let the silence settle in. Let the HOA feel secure. Let them water their petunias and refill their fountains without realizing the pipe was feeding from a spigot I now controlled. Dave Wilson, the water board veteran who tipped us off, called me after the transfer was official. "Just so you know," he said, "Clear Hollow's trying to pull records on the sale. They don't know who bought it yet. But they're spooked." I smiled into the receiver. Let them panic a bit longer. Sarah arranged a consultation with Olivia Parker, an environmental attorney specializing in water rights. Texas law is notoriously murky when it comes to surface water and underground flow, but Olivia cut through it like a hot blade. "Texas follows the doctrine of prior appropriation," she explained. "First in time, first in right. In plain English, you own the headwaters. You have priority rights to regulate and maintain its flow. They can't take what you don't give." "But can I cut it off?" She shrugged. "Not vindictively, but for purposes like environmental conservation, infrastructure maintenance, or suspected unauthorized use. Absolutely." She paused. "You'll need to document everything, and I mean everything. Install meters, flow sensors, file for routine maintenance permits, make it clean." I looked at Sarah. "We're going to do this by the book." We hired a licensed water systems engineer. I didn't want a YouTube tutorial. I wanted state-sanctioned overkill. He installed a remote-controlled valve system just downstream of the spring, with flow meters, temperature sensors, automated reporting, solar backup, and an encrypted remote kill switch that could shut the flow in under 5 seconds. It cost $26,000, worth every penny. Jennifer stood at the edge of the spring one evening, watching the installation. "You know," she said, "Cynthia thinks she's dealing with a tech guy who inherited a cow pasture. She's about to meet a logistics engineer with revenge issues." We both laughed, but it wasn't a joke. Step 1 was legal cover. We filed maintenance documentation with the county, erosion control measures, infrastructure stability inspections, flow rate balancing based on unverified downstream siphoning, all true, all perfectly legitimate. Step 2 was the letter. Sarah drafted it with surgical precision and the tone of a courtroom hammer. To Clear Hollow Ridge, HOA Board of Directors, unauthorized infrastructure on private property. HORS, A&D Stars, Water Source Management. This correspondence serves as formal notice that you have installed and expanded water infrastructure on land you do not own. You have extracted resources from a privately owned water source without legal easement or compensation. You have failed to respond to multiple opportunities for remediation. Our office is prepared to pursue civil action under Texas, trespass, environmental misuse, and unjust enrichment statutes. However, in the spirit of resolution, we propose a negotiated agreement that includes immediate removal of all unauthorized infrastructure, fair market compensation for past resource usage, a formal water access contract moving forward. You have 72 hours to respond. Failure to respond will trigger all available legal and practical remedies. We sent it by certified mail, email, and posted it on the HOA's online portal. Then we waited. Cynthia's reply came 36 hours later, but not in the form of a counteroffer. It came in a cease and desist letter from a sharp-jawed man named Gregory Hoffman, an HOA-aligned attorney who made his living blurring lines and bullying landowners. The letter was 4 pages of legal fluff and veiled threats. Any attempt to obstruct community water infrastructure will result in immediate legal action. Our records include easement documentation signed in 2021. Interfering with essential services constitutes malicious intent. We will pursue damages, injunctions, and sanctions. Sarah read it with her lips pursed, then tossed it onto the kitchen table. "This is a bluff." I didn't respond. I just walked out back, sat under the oak tree overlooking the creek, pulled out the control app, and stared at the one button that read, "Close valve." I waited until Tuesday. Forecast 1-3. By 10:00 am, we knew Clear Hollow's reservoirs would be running on reserve. At 10:15, I pressed the button. Nothing happened immediately. These systems aren't Hollywood. Water keeps flowing for a while like a liar who hasn't realized the mic is still hot. But by 2 p.m., reports started trickling in. Sprinklers sputtering. The entrance fountain drained to a gurgling echo. Residents calling the HOA office demanding answers. By sundown, chaos. Cynthia called a press conference on the steps of the community center. She wore a navy blue power suit and righteous indignation. "This is an act of environmental terrorism," she declared to 3 local news stations. "A disgruntled landowner with a vendetta has jeopardized the well-being of 342 families during a heat emergency." She waved papers. Our HOA followed proper procedures. This is a dispute, not a crime. She never mentioned the pipeline, or the forged easement, or the $300 per quarter residents were paying for independent water security. She tried to control the narrative, and for a moment, she almost did. Until Jennifer struck back. That night, she dropped a bombshell video on social media stolen water inside the HOA pipeline you didn't know you were paying for. It featured footage of Brad Thompson installing the pump, the forged signature comparison, HOA newsletters referencing the upgrades, Sarah explaining the legal implications, Mike Hansen anonymously confirming the hidden fees, drone footage of the illegal pipeline running through our land, and finally, a simple message. This isn't about water, it's about abuse of power. HOA dues should build a community, not bury a pipeline through your neighbor's land. Within hours, it went viral. Local Facebook groups exploded. The news stations reversed course. Even the sheriff's department got calls demanding an investigation. Clear Hollow residents began to realize they'd been funding a crime. Meanwhile, I sat on the porch with Mom, watching the sun drop behind the hills. Sweet tea in hand, motion sensor light blinking in the barn, water still off. She said, "You think they've learned anything yet?" I took a sip. Not yet. Because the pressure drop was just beginning. And Cynthia, she was about to find out what happens when you build a kingdom on stolen water. There's something poetic about a sprinkler dying mid-spin, like a bird shot mid-flight. It stutters, spits once, then gives up. By the end of day 2, Clear Hollow's immaculate lawns were browning like toast. The entrance fountains stood dry. The HOA hotline had melted down. Cynthia tried to maintain control. But HOA control isn't built for crises. It's built for Christmas decorations and passive-aggressive letters about fence paint. And this was war. I gave no interviews. I made no public statements. I didn't have to. Because Jennifer's video had done what Cynthia couldn't undo with 1,000 press releases. It told the truth. People didn't just see a neighbor shutting off a pipeline. They saw a man who'd been trespassed against, stolen from, lied to, threatened, and finally had enough. Day 3 began with a text from Mike Hansen. They're organizing something. HOA meeting tonight. High tensions. That evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch. Coolers packed, cameras rolling, waiting. At 8:03 p.m., we heard it. The sound of gravel under tires. Dozens of them. A convoy of SUVs, minivans, and golf carts, lights off, rolling silent toward our gate. And then, Cynthia's voice, amplified through a bullhorn. Mr. Morgan. She stood at the head of a crowd of about 70 people, bullhorn in one hand, HOA banner in the other. You can't hold an entire community hostage. You're weaponizing water access in a time of crisis. We demand you restore service immediately. Behind her, the crowd was mixed. Some looked angry, some looked embarrassed. A few looked like they just realized they were being used. I stepped down from the porch, walked slowly to the gate. Jennifer had her phone filming from the steps. Sarah held a folder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use a megaphone. But everyone heard me. "This is private property." I said, "You are trespassing." Cynthia stepped forward, waving her free hand like a politician who didn't realize her campaign was already over. "You're destroying our community. Mr. Morgan, elderly residents are at risk. Children can't bathe. Families are suffering because of your spite." I didn't flinch. "I'm protecting my land from theft," I said. "And you're standing here because you got caught." The crowd murmured. She blinked. "What theft? Your illegal pipeline." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a copy of the survey report. "Your unauthorized infrastructure." Sarah handed me a folder. "Your fake easement with my dead father's signature." I held it high. "And your $300 water fees for stolen water." A silence fell over the group. Cynthia opened her mouth, then closed it. Because behind her, Mike Hansen had stepped forward. He didn't need a microphone. "Is that true?" he asked, loud, clear, sharp. "Did you charge us fees for water you didn't have the right to take?" No answer. A woman in the crowd shouted. "Where's the money, Cynthia?" Another voice. "Where's the paperwork?" A third. "What else have you lied about?" The HOA crowd broke rank. The line wavered. Cynthia turned, tried to gather support, but the spell had broken. She was no longer their protector. She was the problem. Sheriff Miller showed up 20 minutes later. He pulled me aside quietly. "The mayor's office wants a sit-down. You, Cynthia, city attorneys, tomorrow, 9 Under what authority?" "Public safety." I nodded. "Tell them I'll be there. But I'm not opening the valve until I see a contract." He nodded back. Then, just before walking off, he added, "Lot of people are starting to realize what she's been doing." That night, Cynthia tried one last move. Richard Coleman, the HOA's vice president, called me from a private number. "Let's end this," he said. "You've made your point. Let the water flow. We'll talk terms." I already offered terms. I said. 72 hours ago. We're willing to pay. Back payments included. Silence. I hung up. Then, at 1:12 a.m., I reopened the valve for exactly 6 hours. Enough time for residents to fill bathtubs, bottles, tanks. I wasn't being kind. I was showing control. I wanted everyone to know I held the key. Not Cynthia, not the HOA, not some letterhead lawyer with a fax machine and a God complex. The next morning, we walked into City Hall, me, Sarah, and Jennifer. Cynthia was already there with Richard and their lawyer. Mayor Hayes sat at the center of a long oak table. "Let's keep this civil," he said. No one laughed. I presented the documents, photos, video, survey maps, legal analysis. I ended with a printed screenshot of the HOA's own public announcement. Thanks to our water system upgrades, Clear Hollow is now independently supported by our own supply line. Below it, a date, a fee notice, and the name C. Elton signed at the bottom. When it was Cynthia's turn, she deflected, blamed contractors, blamed misunderstandings, blamed confusion. But Richard had already switched sides. He said nothing, just looked at the floor. Mayor Hayes turned to me. "What are your terms for restoring water?" I slid the paper across the table. 3 things, I said. 1, full removal of the illegal pipeline under county supervision. 2, a new access agreement at market value with retroactive compensation. 3, a public apology posted to the HOA's site. Richard nodded. Cynthia exploded. "This is extortion." "No," Sarah said calmly. "This is justice." We stood. The meeting ended. And that evening water flowed again. But not from theft, from agreement, from law, from a pipeline that would now go exactly where I said it could. Cynthia didn't show up to the next HOA meeting, but Lisa Thompson, the woman who once stayed silent, did. And she brought receipts. There's something poetic about a sprinkler dying mid-spin, like a bird shot mid-flight. It stutters, spits once, then gives up. By the end of day 2, Clear Hollow's immaculate lawns were browning like toast. The entrance fountain stood dry. The HOA hotline had melted down. Cynthia tried to maintain control. But HOA control isn't built for crises. It's built for Christmas decorations and passive-aggressive letters about fence paint. And this was war. I gave no interviews. I made no public statements. I didn't have to. Because Jennifer's video had done what Cynthia couldn't undo with 1,000 press releases. It told the truth. People didn't just see a neighbor shutting off a pipeline. They saw a man who'd been trespassed against, stolen from, lied to, threatened, and finally had enough. Day 3 began with a text from Mike Hansen. "They're organizing something, HOA meeting tonight, high tensions." That evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch, coolers packed, cameras rolling, waiting. At 8:03 p.m., we heard it. The sound of gravel under tires, dozens of them, a convoy of SUVs, minivans, and golf carts, lights off, rolling silent toward our gate. And then, Cynthia's voice, amplified through a bullhorn. "Mr. Morgan." She stood at the head of a crowd of about 70 people, bullhorn in one hand, HOA banner in the other. "You can't hold an entire community hostage. You're weaponizing water access in a time of crisis. We demand you restore service immediately." Behind her, the crowd was mixed. Some looked angry, some looked embarrassed. A few looked like they just realized they were being used. I stepped down from the porch, walked slowly to the gate. Jennifer had her phone filming from the steps. Sarah held a folder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use a megaphone. But everyone heard me. "This is private property." I said, "You are trespassing." Cynthia stepped forward, waving her free hand like a politician who didn't realize her campaign was already over. "You're destroying our community. Mr. Morgan, elderly residents are at risk. Children can't bathe. Families are suffering because of your spite." I didn't flinch. "I'm protecting my land from theft," I said, "and you're standing here because you got caught." The crowd murmured. She blinked. "What theft?" "Your illegal pipeline." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a copy of the survey report. "Your unauthorized infrastructure." Sarah handed me a folder. your fake easement with my dead father's signature. I held it high, and your $300 water fees for stolen water. A silence fell over the group. Cynthia opened her mouth, then closed it. Because behind her, Mike Hansen had stepped forward. He didn't need a microphone. Is that true? He asked. Loud, clear, sharp. Did you charge us fees for water you didn't have the right to take? No answer, a woman in the crowd shouted. Where's the money, Cynthia? Another voice. Where's the paperwork? A third. What else have you lied about? The HOA crowd broke rank. The line wavered. Cynthia turned, tried to gather support, but the spell had broken. She was no longer their protector. She was the problem. Sheriff Miller showed up 20 minutes later. He pulled me aside quietly. The mayor's office wants a sit-down. You, Cynthia, city attorneys, tomorrow. 9 ma'am. Under what authority? Public safety? I nodded. Tell them I'll be there. But I'm not opening the valve until I see a contract. He nodded back. Then, just before walking off, he added, Lot of people are starting to realize what she's been doing. That night, Cynthia tried one last move. Richard Coleman, the HOA's vice president, called me from a private number. Let's end this, he said. You've made your point. Let the water flow. We'll talk terms. I already offered terms. I said, 72 hours ago. We're willing to pay. Back payments included silence. I hung up. Then, at 1:12 a.m., I reopened the valve for exactly 6 hours. Enough time for residents to fill bathtubs, bottles, tanks. I wasn't being kind. I was showing control. I wanted everyone to know I held the key. Not Cynthia, not the HOA, not some letterhead lawyer with a fax machine and a God complex. The next morning, we walked into City Hall, me, Sarah, and Jennifer. Cynthia was already there with Richard and their lawyer. Mayor Hayes sat at the center of a long oak table. Let's keep this civil, he said. No one laughed. I presented the documents, photos, video, survey maps, legal analysis. I ended with a printed screenshot of the HOA's own public announcement, thanks to our water system upgrades. Clear Hollow is now independently supported by our own supply line. Below it, a date, a fee notice, and the name C. Elton signed at the bottom. When it was Cynthia's turn, she deflected, blamed contractors, blamed misunderstandings, blamed confusion. But Richard had already switched sides. He said nothing, just looked at the floor. Mayor Hayes turned to me. What are your terms for restoring water? I slid the paper across the table. 3 things, I said. 1, full removal of the illegal pipeline under county supervision. 2, a new access agreement at market value with retroactive compensation. 3, a public apology posted to the HOA's site. Richard nodded. Cynthia exploded. This is extortion. No, Sarah said calmly. This is justice. We stood. The meeting ended, and that evening water flowed again. But not from theft, from agreement, from law, from a pipeline that would now go exactly where I said it could. Cynthia didn't show up to the next HOA meeting, but Lisa Thompson, the woman who once stayed silent, did. And she brought receipts. You can't lead a kingdom built on theft. Eventually, someone asks where the gold came from. And for Cynthia Lelton, that moment came 3 days after the City Hall meeting, when the very residents she claimed to serve finally turned on her. It began not with a press release or protest, but a spreadsheet. Lisa Thompson, former silent board member, had been quietly requesting financial records from the HOA for months. Always denied, always redirected. But now, with Cynthia on the defensive and Richard checked out, she finally got access, and what she found lit a fuse no PR campaign could smother. Over $200,000 in special assessments, collected over 3 years earmarked for water infrastructure. But instead of pipes and pumps, the ledger showed $42,000 to a luxury home renovation company, $18,000 to a landscape design consultant who doubled as Cynthia's cousin, $9,700 on airline tickets to Italy, Paris, and Aspen, and a recurring monthly payment to a firm called DL, consulting a shell entity tied directly to Cynthia's ex-husband. It was embezzlement. Elegant, quiet, bold, and now exposed. Lisa brought the evidence to the HOA's emergency meeting, and this time, Jennifer and a news crew were there to film it. Cynthia tried to skip the meeting, but the bylaws required her attendance under active financial audit. She walked into the room like a queen returning from exile. But this wasn't her court anymore. Lisa stepped to the mic. "Clear Hollow residents," she said. "You've been lied to." Then she dropped the bombshell, the spreadsheet, the records, the photos, the fake contracts, the offshore transfers, all of it, gasps, outrage, audible disbelief, then silence, then voices, then shouting. "Where's our money? Cynthia, you said it was for drought protection. You threatened me with fines for my mailbox while you were flying to France." She tried to regain control, but even Richard stood up and said, "I'm resigning, effective immediately." Lisa made it formal. A vote was called. Cynthia Lilton was removed as HOA president effective immediately. But that wasn't the end. Because Cynthia's final card had been a forged agreement, the fake easement supposedly signed by Eli's father, Jennifer wasn't done. She tracked down the notary listed on the document, a man named Kenneth Wolf, who hadn't renewed his license since 2016. The signature copied and pasted from a scanned tax form. The date filed 1 month after Eli's father passed away. Jennifer confronted Brad Thompson, the facilities manager, with this information, and after 20 minutes of nervous pacing, he cracked. "She made me do it," he whispered. "She said it was just a formality, that Mr. Morgan wouldn't notice, that the county doesn't check these things. Sarah got it all on record." Within a week, the district attorney's office opened an investigation: forgery, fraud, embezzlement, unauthorized infrastructure installation, environmental violations, and worst of all, for Cynthia, conspiracy to commit racketeering. They raided her home, found undeclared income, found 2 versions of the same easement, one with Richard's signature, one without, found receipts, found a burner phone, and 1 boarding pass to Cancun, packed and ready. She was arrested as she tried to leave town. No press conference, no goodbye, just flashing red and blue lights outside a gated community that now had no water, no trust, and no president. Back at the ranch, I got a call from Sheriff Miller. "Just wanted you to know," he said quietly. "We've recovered the chemicals used in the contamination complaint. Same ones Green used in that forged inspection. She bought them herself. Credit card receipt. Green was arrested too. His office raided. His reputation gone. The county offered me a formal settlement, $125,000 for unauthorized water extraction, $18,000 for property damage, $10,000 in legal fees. Full public apology, published across 3 newspapers. I accepted. But I didn't keep it all. Instead, we used part of the money to install a sustainable irrigation system, solar water monitors, a community education trail, and a small outdoor classroom along the creek. Your father would be proud," Mom said, standing beside the new Morgan Water Conservation marker as we unveiled it to the public. Even Clear Hollow changed. Lisa, now interim president, opened the HOA books, held town halls, let residents vote on policies. Imagine that. And Mike Hansen. He organized a volunteer crew to help us reseed the pasture near the damaged pipeline. Some of them had protested at my gate. Now they planted native grass with their bare hands. Jennifer's reporting won 2 regional awards. Her series, The Cost of Control Inside the Dark Side of HOAs, became required reading in local civics classes. And Sarah. She didn't just win the case, she won something else too, but I'll save that for the final chapter. As for me, I still own the headwaters, still control the flow, but I don't have to close the valve anymore, because now, when the water runs, it does so with permission. The new fence line ran firm and straight along the pasture edge, solar lights blinking gently, motion sensors tucked in brush, and fresh native grass sprouting where the old pipeline once trespassed. Jennifer called it a scar we turned into a statement. I just called it justice. It had been 3 months since Cynthia's arrest. Clear Hollow, once a model of manicured control, now buzzed with something unfamiliar: transparency. Lisa kept her promise, opened the books, returned misused funds, canceled the community defense fee, and most importantly, gave residents their voices back, their votes, their rights. Funny how people don't realize how much they've been silenced until someone reminds them what truth sounds like. As for me, I never went back to Silicon Valley. Could have got offers. Even had one recruiter email. I hear you've gotten good at pressure systems. But the spreadsheets and shipping routes didn't call me the way the land did. This place sunburnt, flawed, stubborn was home. And now, it wasn't just inherited, it was earned. Sarah stayed too, not just because of court cases or community charters. One evening, as we sat on the porch drinking coffee, she looked out at the creek and said, "You know what I respect most?" I raised an eyebrow. That you didn't build a wall, you built a valve. It stuck with me. Jennifer's documentary aired on PBS, won 2 regional Emmys. She called the final episode "The Creek Remembers," because it does. It remembers the sound of backhoes digging where they shouldn't. It remembers the silence of stolen water. It remembers the spray paint, the lawsuits, the lies, and it remembers the day the current returned not forced, but free. Mom now runs a nature program on the weekends, brings in kids from nearby schools to teach them about conservation, respect for land, and how to identify bird calls. Sometimes, when they gather by the creek's edge, I'll hear her say, "See that fence that's not to keep people out. That's to show them where respect begins." And that white HOA truck. We never pulled it out of the creek. Didn't need to. It's half buried now, rusted, sun-bleached, and overgrown with moss. But we left it there on purpose. A monument, a warning, a punchline, a memory. Sometimes, I'll catch people staring at it, not knowing what it is. One tourist asked, "Was that an accident?" I smiled. "No," I said, "that was a decision." 1 year later, to the day, we hosted the Morgan Creek Stewardship Day. Clear Hollow residents showed up with gloves and rakes, kids painted birdhouses, Mike Hansen grilled burgers. Lisa gave a speech that ended with, "Water doesn't divide us anymore. It connects us." And Sarah. She kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Your father would have liked today." I looked out at the pasture, the rebuilt pump house, the trail signs, the children laughing where once the ground had been contested. And I agreed. Because in the end, this wasn't just about a pipe, or a deed, or even a courtroom. It was about standing up and saying, "Here is the line, here is the land, here is the legacy. You do not cross it." And when they did, we fought back, not with violence, not with rage, but with the one thing HOA bullies never see coming: evidence, resolve, and patience measured in acres. So, the next time someone tells you it's just an HOA, they can't really hurt you. You tell them about the time one tried to steal a creek and the man who shut off the water and made the whole dam system go dry. Because out here, some fences are made of wire, some are made of law. But the best ones, they're made of memory. And memory flows deep, just like the creek. So, what's the lesson here? That land isn't just property, it's memory. And water. Water flows with history. You don't get to take it without asking, and you sure as hell don't get to lie about it. If you love this story, or you just hate crooked HOA boards with too much power and too little accountability, hit that like button, subscribe, and join the movement over here at HOA Karen Files, where we expose every clipboard Karen and every backdoor deal, one saga at a time. Remember, out here, the creek remembers, and now, so do you.